The morning after my fiancée won $12 million, she was gone. No note, no call, not even a fight the night before. Just an empty closet, a stripped-down dresser, and the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the air like a cruel joke. Her name was Lauren Mitchell, 30 years old, bright smile, sharp mind, the kind of woman who could light up a room without even trying. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for one. I thought we were building a life. What I didn't realize was that she was already planning her exit, and the winning lottery ticket gave her the perfect excuse. My name's Alex Carter, 34, IT consultant out of Phoenix. I'm not rich. I'm not flashy. But I was steady, reliable. The guy who always paid bills on time, who made sure the fridge was stocked, who left the light on for her when she worked late. I believed those things mattered. That morning, staring at her side of the bed, I realized how little they had meant to her. The night before, when she held that winning ticket in her hands, she laughed and cried at the same time. I kissed her forehead and told her we'd be okay now. That life was about to get easier. She hugged me, whispered, "We'll see." And I thought it was nerves. But it wasn't. It was a warning I didn't catch. I didn't shout when I found her gone. I didn't beg or call her phone until the battery died. I just stood in that empty room, silent, letting the truth settle. I wasn't her partner. I was her placeholder until something better, or richer, came along. That was the first hit. Not her leaving. Not the money. The realization that every laugh, every plan, every whispered promise under the covers had been nothing more than an act. And I had believed it. I packed up her remaining things into 2 boxes. Dresses she hadn't bothered to take, shoes she'd left behind. I stacked them by the door, like luggage waiting for an owner who was never coming back. And then I sat at the kitchen table, opened a notebook, and wrote 3 words at the top of a clean page. Freeze. Track. Respond. It was the same protocol I used at work when a system was breached. Contain the damage. Follow the trail. Then strike. And as strange as it sounds, that's exactly how I treated this. A breach. Not of a network. Of my life. I didn't know then that Lauren would come back. I didn't know she would return weeks later, hollow-eyed and desperate, talking about betrayal and scams and begging for forgiveness. But I knew one thing. If she ever walked back through my door, she wasn't going to find the same man she left. Because that morning, in the silence of an empty apartment, I understood something my father once told me. Some losses break you. Others sharpen you. And I wasn't broken. Not yet. I was sharpening. The first week without Lauren was a study in silence. Her side of the bed stayed cold. Her toothbrush sat untouched by the sink. The apartment echoed differently, without her voice filling it. Most men would have raged, maybe drowned themselves in alcohol, or pleaded with friends for sympathy. I did none of that. I treated it like a breach, like a corrupted system. Step 1, freeze. I didn't cancel her phone line. I didn't shut down our shared accounts. I left them running, untouched, because I knew they were trails. Digital fingerprints of a person who thought she'd vanished clean. What she didn't understand was that silence doesn't mean absence. It means observation. At work, I functioned as if nothing had changed. Colleagues asked about the wedding plans, about Lauren, and I gave them short answers. Smiles without details. They assumed I was tired, stressed. I let them. The fewer people who knew, the less noise in the system. Meanwhile, in the quiet of my apartment, I tracked. Her credit card statements lit up with charges in Scottsdale boutiques, dinners in Vegas, a down payment on a condo under her name alone. She hadn't even bothered to mask the trail. That was the arrogance money gives people. It makes them believe they're untouchable, that consequences are for others. I took notes. Dates, times, amounts. Not to confront her. Not yet. I had no interest in arguing. I wanted a record. Something I could hold like a weapon when the moment came. Because it always comes. Greed never runs in a straight line. It circles back, searching for more, until it traps itself. Nights were the hardest. That's when the quiet pressed deepest, when the phantom of her laughter rattled through my head. I'd pour a drink, sit on the balcony, and stare at the city lights, forcing myself to remember the truth. She hadn't been stolen from me. She had revealed herself to me. There's a difference. One leaves you bitter. The other leaves you sharper. By the second week, whispers started coming back through friends. Someone had seen her in Vegas at a high-stakes poker table. Someone else mentioned a new man at her side. A slick type with expensive suits and the kind of grin that fades as soon as the lights go out. His name was Ethan, and the word was he knew how to grow money fast. I didn't react. I just wrote his name down in the same notebook where I'd written freeze. Track. Respond. The third week, her social media exploded with photos of champagne, designer clothes, rooftop parties. Lauren smiling like she'd found heaven. But I noticed the details, the way her smiles looked tighter, the way Ethan was always close but never touching her. And the comments under her photos, strangers warning about scams, half buried beneath waves of praise. That was when I knew the pattern. She hadn't left for freedom. She'd left for a fantasy. And fantasies always collapse. So I waited. Quiet. Watching. Because I knew the silence wasn't just mine anymore. Soon, it would be hers. By the fourth week, the shine on Lauren's new life began to dull. The photos slowed. The comments under her posts grew sharper. Be careful with him. That guy's bad news. This looks like a scam waiting to happen. At first, she ignored them. But then her captions changed. The confident tone softened into forced smiles and vague quotes about trusting people. It wasn't the language of someone celebrating. It was the language of someone trying to convince herself. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I stayed silent. My silence was a mirror she couldn't look away from. She'd expected me to beg, to chase, to fight. The absence of those things unnerved her more than anger ever could. And I could feel it, even without words. One night, I opened the shared bank app we'd once used. She hadn't cut me off yet. Maybe because she forgot. Maybe because she thought it didn't matter. The balance was lower. Much lower. Millions gone in weeks. Withdrawals into accounts with names I didn't recognize. Ethan's fingerprints all over it. I sat back, watching the numbers drain, and I realized something. Lauren hadn't just chosen greed. She'd chosen a predator. And predators always leave nothing behind. By the sixth week, mutual friends began to call me. One said she'd shown up at her parents' house, thinner, frantic, arguing on the phone. Another spotted her alone at a coffee shop. No makeup, hair pulled back, nothing like the glossy version she'd posted online. They asked me if I knew what was going on. I told them nothing, because my role wasn't to intervene. It was to observe. That weekend, the call finally came. Her number lit up my phone, the same one she'd left behind when she walked out. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I answered, but I didn't speak. I just listened. Her voice cracked on the other end, saying my name, asking if I could hear her. She sounded smaller, like someone stripped of every ounce of certainty. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd trusted the wrong people, that the money was gone. Ethan was gone. Everything she thought she'd gained had been ripped away. She said she needed to see me, to talk, to explain. I didn't answer. The silence stretched so long that she broke down crying, filling the line with apologies, excuses, promises of change. I let her pour it all out, every word she'd once denied me, until her voice was hoarse. Then I hung up. No anger. No goodbye. Just quiet. Because silence isn't empty. It's a verdict. And that night, lying in bed, I knew she'd come back. Not because she wanted me, but because she had nowhere else to go. And when she did, I would be ready. It was a Tuesday evening when the knock came. Soft at first, then harder, insistent, like someone afraid the silence inside would swallow them whole. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Lauren. She stood there on the other side of the door, makeup smudged, eyes red from crying, her once perfect hair pulled back into a careless knot. She looked nothing like the woman who had left with $12 million and a suitcase full of promises. She looked like someone who had been stripped down to the bone. I opened the door, but didn't say a word. Her lips parted, ready to rush out excuses, explanations, maybe apologies, but the words died when she saw my face. Calm, silent, unmoved. She whispered my name, voice trembling, and asked if she could come in. I stepped aside without speaking. Inside, she perched on the edge of the couch, hands twisting in her lap, like a guest in a stranger's house. She tried to fill the air with her story. She said Ethan wasn't who she thought he was, that he'd promised investments, returns, opportunities too good to be real. She said she ignored the warnings, ignored the doubts, because she wanted to believe she'd found her golden future. Then, one morning, he was gone. Accounts drained. Her condo empty. The money vanished as if it had never existed. I listened. Not a nod, not a word. Just silence. And that silence was heavier than any question I could have asked. She kept talking, faster now, as if the quiet pressed harder against her chest with every second. She said she regretted leaving me, that she realized too late what we had, that she was lost without me. Her eyes searched mine, desperate for reaction, for validation, for anything that would tell her she still had power here. But I gave her nothing. The silence became unbearable. She started crying, real tears this time, not the kind that softened me in the past. She begged for forgiveness, said she wanted another chance, that money had blinded her, but love had always been real. The words poured out, but they fell flat in the space between us, swallowed by the quiet I refused to break. When she reached for my hand, I stood. She froze, her arms suspended in the air, waiting. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and returned to my chair across from her. Still silent. Her hand dropped back to her lap like a broken thing. She whispered that she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she was asking anyway. And still, I said nothing. Because silence wasn't avoidance. It was power. And sitting there across from the woman who had once walked away without looking back, I knew the longer I stayed quiet, the more she would unravel. And I wasn't finished watching her break. The days that followed her return were strange. Lauren lingered in the apartment like a shadow, moving softly, watching me carefully, as though every breath I took was a test she was afraid to fail. She began cooking again, meals she hadn't touched in months, setting the table like nothing had happened. She folded my laundry, cleaned the rooms, replaced the sheets on the bed. It was a performance, and she knew it. I let her. I ate the food. I wore the clothes. I slept in the sheets. But I said nothing. I gave her no reaction, no validation. And the absence of my words was heavier than any argument we could have had. She started leaving small gifts on the counter, my favorite coffee beans, a new tie, even a framed photo of us from 2 years ago. She said it reminded her of what we once had. I looked at it, nodded once, and set it aside. No words. The silence carved deeper into her every time. One evening, she sat across from me at dinner, her fork untouched, eyes glassy. She whispered that she knew she had broken me, that she knew money had poisoned her, that she didn't deserve my kindness but wanted a chance to prove she'd changed. The words hung in the air, fragile and desperate. I chewed, swallowed, set my fork down. And then I stood and walked out onto the balcony without responding. She sat frozen at the table until her food went cold. By the third week, her patience cracked. She began to cry more often, late at night when she thought I was asleep. Her sobs were muffled, but I heard every one of them. She pleaded with herself in whispers, saying she'd fix this, she'd fix us. But the truth was written in the silence I gave her. There was nothing to fix. During the day, she tried harder. She asked about work, about my friends, about future plans. I gave her one-word answers, sometimes only a look. And the more she filled the air with words, the clearer it became that she was drowning in her own guilt. One Saturday morning, she broke. She dropped to her knees in front of me, clutching my hands, tears streaking her face. She begged for forgiveness, begged for another chance, begged for me to say something, anything. Her voice cracked under the weight of her own desperation. I didn't pull my hands away. I didn't comfort her. I didn't even blink. I simply stood there in silence, letting her crumble at my feet. Because silence wasn't cruelty. It was the sentence she had written for herself the moment she chose $12 million over me. And now, she was serving it one day at a time. Lauren's fear shifted into something sharper, paranoia. She started watching me like she expected proof of something she couldn't name. Her eyes followed me when I left for work. She asked where I'd been when I came home. She checked the pockets of my jacket when I left it hanging near the door. Every move I made seemed to unsettle her, as though my silence carried secrets she wasn't ready to face. One night, she asked outright if I had been tracking her after she left. Her voice cracked, and she tried to smile when she said it, pretending it was a joke. I didn't laugh. I didn't answer. I just looked at her until she looked away. That silence told her more than words ever could. She realized then that I knew things she hadn't confessed, things she thought she had hidden. The truth was, I didn't need to confront her with every detail. I already had her financial trail printed and filed, every purchase, every transfer, every sign of Ethan's scam. But I didn't show her. Not yet. The power wasn't in proving what I knew. The power was in letting her guess, letting her wonder how much of herself she had already revealed without saying a word. Her panic grew in small ways. She hovered near the mailbox, intercepting letters before I could touch them. She deleted apps from her phone, wiped her laptop, tried to erase the past. But erasing doesn't undo damage. It only deepens the suspicion. And every time she made one of those desperate moves, I wrote it down in my notebook, adding another line to the record of her collapse. She started talking in circles, confessing half-truths while pretending they were full ones. She admitted Ethan wasn't who she thought he was, but she never said his name. She admitted some money was gone, but she avoided the number. She admitted mistakes were made, but she never used the word betrayal. She kept testing the silence, hoping I'd fill it with answers she could control. I never did. One night, after pacing the apartment like a caged animal, she broke down again. She asked if I hated her. She said she could see it in my eyes, that my silence was worse than yelling. She said if I would just scream at her, just curse her name, she could take it. But the quiet was suffocating her. I poured myself a drink, sat across from her, and let her words hang. No reaction, no comfort, just steady silence. She cried harder, her shoulders shaking, her voice shattering as she begged me to tell her what I was thinking. I didn't, because silence wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about control, and as long as I held it, she was powerless. She could beg, confess, collapse all she wanted, but every second of that silence reminded her. She had gambled everything for $12 million and lost far more than money. And now, the silence was all she had left. By the 7th week of her return, Lauren was unraveling faster than I'd expected. The silence had done its work. Her defenses crumbled, her excuses tangled, her strength drained. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, folding laundry that wasn't dirty, desperate to occupy herself. Anything was better than sitting across from me in the heavy quiet that revealed everything she tried to hide. One evening, she placed an envelope on the table in front of me. Inside was what was left of her accounts, barely a fraction of the $12 million. She whispered that she wanted me to have it, that she didn't care about money anymore, that all she wanted was me. I opened the envelope, looked at the numbers, then slid it back toward her without a word. Her face fell. She realized then what I'd known since the beginning. Money was never the problem. It was her choice. Her panic deepened after that. She began asking questions not to know the answers, but to measure her own chances. Did I still love her? Did I want her here? Was there hope? I gave her nothing. My silence turned every question into a mirror, and every time she looked into it, she saw the truth she didn't want to face. She grew restless at night, pacing the living room, whispering to herself about fixing things. Once, I woke to the sound of her on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low, urgent, begging someone for help. I didn't need to know who it was. I just wrote it down in my notebook the next morning, another line in the record of her desperation. By the second month, she was no longer trying to impress me with gifts or meals. She was begging for survival. She followed me from room to room, asking what I wanted from her. She cried in the doorway of my office, saying the silence was driving her insane. She said she would do anything to earn back my trust. I sat at my desk, eyes on my screen, and didn't answer. Her sobs filled the space, but I stayed quiet, steady, immovable. That silence wasn't cruelty. It was the sentence she had written herself, and every day she served it, the weight grew heavier. The turning point came one night when she asked if I was going to leave her. Her voice broke on the question, raw with fear. I looked at her, held her gaze, and stayed silent. That silence was louder than any goodbye. She collapsed onto the floor, clutching her knees, whispering that she couldn't take it anymore. And as I watched her crumble, I realized the truth. She had left me the morning she won $12 million. I had just waited long enough for her to finally see it herself. The quiet wasn't punishment. It was preparation. And soon, it would end with the clean break she feared most. By the time the 3rd month rolled around, Lauren wasn't just desperate, she was hollow. The woman who once glowed with laughter and certainty now looked worn down, her face pale, her voice thin, her steps unsteady. And still, I stayed silent. Every day she woke up waiting for a word from me, and every night She went to bed with the same quiet pressing down on her. It was the heaviest punishment I could have given. That was when I decided it was time to move from silence into exposure. Not loud, not chaotic, not cruel. Just final. I began making preparations the way I would prepare for a system reset at work, methodical, precise, controlled. I gathered the files I'd collected, her bank records, the transfers, the withdrawals, the condo papers, everything that painted the picture of what she had chosen when she left. I placed them in a neat folder and locked it in my desk. Then I reached out to her parents. I invited them to dinner. Lauren lit up when she overheard me on the phone, her eyes wide with hope. She thought it was a sign, a chance, maybe even forgiveness. She started cleaning the apartment top to bottom, cooking a meal she hadn't touched in years, setting the table with her best smile rehearsed in the mirror. She thought she was about to prove to them, and to me, that she belonged back in this life. But I had something else planned. The night came. Her parents arrived, smiling, warm, relieved to see us sitting together. Lauren poured drinks, served food, laughed too loudly at her father's stories. She reached for my hand across the table like she used to, holding on a little too tightly, her eyes begging me to play along. I let her hold it, but I didn't smile. My silence was the only truth at that table. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to get something from my desk. When I returned, I placed the folder in the center of the table. Lauren's smile faltered. Her mother asked what it was. I didn't answer. I just slid the folder toward her father. He opened it, his eyes scanning the pages, his face hardening with every line. Her mother leaned over, covering her mouth with her hand as she read. Lauren's hands trembled. She tried to explain, to laugh it off, to say it wasn't what it looked like. But the silence in the room drowned her words. Her parents looked at her differently now, not as their daughter who made a mistake, but as someone who had chosen greed and betrayal over love and trust. I didn't need to say anything. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Lauren's eyes darted to me, pleading, begging for me to intervene, to soften the blow. I just sat back, calm, watching the truth settle around her. Because exposure doesn't need shouting. It needs silence. And that night, the silence ended her last defense. Lauren's collapse didn't happen with a scream. It happened with silence, the same silence I had carried since the day she left. Her parents sat frozen at the table, reading through the records, their eyes widening with each page. Her father's jaw tightened. Her mother's hand shook as she set down the folder. They didn't need me to explain. The evidence told the story of greed, betrayal, and loss more clearly than I ever could. Lauren tried to speak, but her voice came out broken, a string of half-formed excuses. She said she'd been manipulated, that she didn't understand what she was doing, that Ethan had promised her things she couldn't refuse. But her words were thin, collapsing under the weight of the documents sitting in front of her parents. Her mother whispered her name, soft but sharp, like a question she couldn't bear to finish. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. She turned to me, desperate, reaching out as if I could still rescue her from herself. I didn't move. I let her hand hover in the air before it dropped back to her lap. The silence spread like a wave. It wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone in that room. Her father pushed the folder back across the table toward me, his face pale, his voice low as he said he didn't know who she was anymore. Lauren crumbled at those words, folding in on herself like the strength had been pulled from her bones. She sobbed openly then, begging her parents to believe her, begging me to say something. Anything that would make this nightmare stop. But I stayed steady, my expression calm, my silence cutting sharper than any accusation. Because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to explain. She had already told her story with her choices, and now the people who mattered most to her were seeing it without filter or disguise. After dinner, her parents left in a heavy, wordless silence. They didn't hug her goodbye. They didn't promise things would get better. They just walked out, their disappointment louder than any anger could have been. Lauren sat on the couch, shaking, staring at the door long after it closed. She whispered that she had lost everything, her money, her family, and me. Her voice cracked, and she asked if there was any way to fix it, any way to start over. I looked at her, held her gaze for a long moment, and said nothing. The quiet stretched, and in it, she realized the answer. Her tears slowed, replaced by the emptiness of someone who had finally understood the finality of their own actions. She wasn't waiting for forgiveness anymore. She was staring at the silence and seeing it for what it truly was, the end. And for the first time since she left, I felt no anger, no grief, no need for revenge. Only clarity. Because silence had done what words never could. It had closed the door completely. The night after her parents left, the apartment felt heavier than ever. Lauren sat on the couch, shoulders slumped, her eyes swollen from crying. She didn't try to speak anymore. She just stared at the floor, as if waiting for something that wasn't coming. The silence between us had finally broken her, not with a scream or an argument, but with the simple realization that there was nothing left to fight for. I moved through the apartment quietly, collecting the last of my things. A few clothes, some books, a box of files. I didn't pack in haste. I didn't slam doors. I worked slowly, methodically, like a man closing down a project that had already been finished. Lauren finally asked, in the smallest voice I had ever heard from her, if I was leaving. I stopped, looked at her, but didn't answer. The quiet was my answer, and it cut deeper than words ever could. Her eyes filled again, but the tears didn't fall. She knew. I placed my keys on the counter, next to the photo frame she'd tried to resurrect weeks earlier. Us, smiling, back when I thought love meant permanence. I left it behind. It wasn't my memory anymore. When I walked to the door, she whispered my name, her voice trembling, reaching for me one last time. I paused with my hand on the handle, but I didn't turn. I didn't give her the relief of my eyes, the comfort of a final sentence. I opened the door, stepped out, and closed it behind me. The sound was soft, but final. Outside, the night air was cool, steady, clean. For the first time since she left with $12 million in a suitcase, I felt weightless. The silence that had once been a weapon now felt like freedom. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt piece by piece. A new apartment, smaller but mine. A routine without shadows. Work filled my days, and at night, I found peace in the quiet. No begging, no lies, no cracks to patch. Just silence, steady and calm. Friends asked if I'd heard from her again. I told them nothing. The truth was, I didn't care. Whether she chased another fantasy or drowned in regret, it didn't matter. Her story had ended the moment she chose money over me. My story had only just begun. Some men seek closure in confrontation. They shout, demand, rage until their voices break. I didn't need that. I chose silence. And silence gave me everything back: clarity, control, freedom. I hadn't won by fighting her. I had won by refusing to play her game at all. Because sometimes the loudest revenge isn't noise. It's walking away without a word and letting silence finish what betrayal began. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.